Good evening, comrades. It's Sebastian Mihailov here with the last game from the first day of the finals between Wesley So and Magnus Carlsen. And boy, do we have a treat. Wesley So, he has to win in order not to lose the first match. I should point out that if he loses, he can still come back tomorrow. But he has to win in order to make it even and tie the first match. And here he is with the white pieces playing against Magnus, and let's see how the game went. E4, C5. Magnus goes for the Sicilian this time. Knight F3, Knight C6. No knight Orf. D4, takes. Knight F6, Knight C3, E5. And this is known as the Sveshnikov variation. Perhaps Magnus's pet line in the Sicilian one that he did use exclusively against Fabiano Caruana in the previous World Championship match. So Wesley plays knight b5. That is the critical move. d6 from Magnus, and here Wesley goes for knight d5. So this is a very interesting move, and one of the two critical moves, I'd say. The other one is bishop g5. Both of those are tried. They lead to different positions. Very, very rich opening in both strategical and tactical elements. Very complicated opening, but I do like knight d5. This is honestly my personal favorite. Although I've been playing bishop g5 mostly when I've faced Sveshnikov myself. So Black is forced to take due to the knight c7 threat right here on c7. So knight takes d5, e takes d5, and knight b8. And here Wesley plays this move, queen f3, which looks like a very bizarre move. It's a sort of mysterious move, which when you first look at it, seems like it has absolutely no purpose at all. Because I can simply play a3, and then now the knight has to move, and then something like f5. Already looks very good for black. It doesn't make any sense. But there's a sneaky idea behind queen f3, and that is to play queen a3 in this position, which is by far the best move. And the point is that black cannot take due to the rook hanging on a8, while we do have some extra pressure on d6 here. So Magnus plays b6. He simply wants to play bishop b7 at some point, attacking the knight. There is another move as well, and that is bishop e7. And I think the game goes something like bishop e2, castles, and c4 looks logical. And after something like f5, then you can play bishop d2, or you do not want to play bishop e3 because of f4, but you could play bishop d2 and then potentially bishop e4. This position is very complicated, very interesting. That is the other way to play, but Magnus went for b6. Bishop g5 from Wesley So, another tactical trick. It's a poisonous bishop. You cannot take it due to the fact that knight c7 is a fork, and the white wins. So bishop e7 is played. However, I must say that I think f6 is slightly more accurate here. And this also kicks the bishop. Black gains a tempo. And the resulting position after bishop takes e7, king takes e7, as we will see in the game, is simply quite dangerous for black. So f6 would have been a better try. After something like bishop d2, with the idea of bishop b4, black can then play bishop e7, attacking the knight, so the knight has to move. And here we have a complicated position. An interesting idea here would be to play g4 just to prevent f5 and then later castle along with a very complicated position. That's all I can say about it. It's an absolute mess, but I do think white is doing all right. I think it's just double-edged, and the game could go either way, but it's better than the move bishop e7. And why is bishop e7 bad? Well, I can take, and now black is forced to take with the king. He has to protect d6, and long castle. Black cannot take the knight on b5. The rook is still not protected on a8. So Magnus finally protects the rook with bishop e7. The knight is forced to move back. And this is very comfortable for white. Magnus's king here is very, very exposed. But is Wesley so going to be able to break through? He has to win this game in order to tie the first match. How did the game proceed? Well, Magnus played knight d7. That is the logical move, developing the knight. f4. This is a typical move that you want to make when you want to open up the position. It doesn't really work to take because I will play rook e1. And keep in mind that I cannot play knight e5 here because that one can be taken due to this pin right here on the pawn. So here the king would have to move to f8 and then I take on d6 and black is lost. So queen c7 makes sense. So I like that move. It's a very natural move, protecting the pawn. You do not want to play something like f6 though, because these squares here are far too weak and I can later play g3 and bishop h3, perhaps even already. So that wouldn't be too good. So queen c7, f takes e5, knight takes e5, and it doesn't look so simple to break through, does it? Black's knight is a monster here on e5, and it's a nice shield, and it certainly is rough to break through. So let's see what Wesley did. Queen b4. He wants to improve the queen's position. The queen is no longer well placed on a3 and he doesn't really do that much. So queen b4 makes sense. Maybe I can put the queen on h4. Put it somewhere else at least. Magnus plays h5. He's simply grabbing some space. Bishop e2 is a normal developing move. King f8. Putting the king on a safer square. Rook f1, rook e8, taking the e-file. All of these moves are very logical. Magnus is playing quite well here. Rook f5. Magnus takes more space with h4. And black has decent control on the dark squares, so it certainly isn't easy. And well, although it's not easy, it is looking quite good for Wesley here. And he plays rook f4, which is a good move. Rook f4 is a good move, attacking the pawn. Queen d8 protecting the pawn, and king b1, moving the king out of this diagonal right here. Rook h6, rook d4, attacking the pawn once more. And Magnus simply plays h3. He doesn't want to give that pawn away, and rightfully so. h3 is a good move. g3. Bishop c8, putting the bishop on a better square than b7. The bishop on b7 wasn't really do that much, so it stands better. It stands better on c8, protecting the pawn on h3 and the pawn on a6. a4, perhaps even play a5 at some point. Maybe in the very far future, but at least giving some air to the king. King g8. Magnus's king is finally gotten himself to a safe spot here. Rook e4. This is a slightly bizarre move. I'm not really sure what the Wesley wanted to do, but it's not so easy to find a way to improve your position. This knight defends everything. This rook defends the pawn on d6. The queen defends the pawn on b6. And it really is rough to break through. One idea is to double on the f-file, but again, the knight protects the pawn on f7. It certainly isn't easy. So rook e4 is a move that kind of a waiting move. But let's see what Wesley's idea really was. Queen c7, rook h4, a5, queen d4. So more things have happened. I'm not sure whether or not a5 is a good move, because a5 weakens the b5 square dramatically, but I'm sure Magnus was sick of having his bishop on c8 protecting the pawn on a6, so he wanted to get rid of that weakness. But the bad thing about that is now the pawn on the square on b5 gets very weak. So a better move would have been to maybe take and then simply queen c5, and this is fairly comfortable for black, no problem at all. And after queen f4, okay, knight g6 here wins, but after something like queen d4, a5 would have been possible, or even f5 just to prevent knight e4. And this is looking quite promising for black. Black has no problems. whatsoever. Rook h3 could always, let's say I take here and then I take back. Rook h3 would then be met by f4 in many lines. So let's go back. a5, queen d4, rook takes h4. Rook takes h4. Things are starting to happening now in the game. Keep in mind now that the rook doesn't protect the d6 square anymore. Wesley has also gotten the b5 square for his knight. So I'd say this is a great improvement for Wesley. At least it's a slight improvement. Bishop b5 really isn't the best move in this position, surprisingly enough. It is a very logical move, perhaps the most logical move in the position. But the best move would have been to try to go for the ending after queen c5, put the queen on c5, and at some point try to make white take the queen. And here it's not so easy to find any moves for white. For example, knight b5 would have been met by knight g6, attacking the rook on h4 and the bishop on e2. So there are many tactics here. And if I play bishop b5, knight f3 all of a sudden comes. And there's still a lot of tactics, because if I take on c5, black can simply play rook e1 and take back. And now the pawn on h2 is falling, and this pawn is becoming a queen. So black actually has a lot of tricks here. So queen c5 would have been a very good move, where the game should probably go something like king c1 and then just take the endgame, I think, which is roughly balanced. But Magnus plays bishop f5, and this allows rook h5. Perhaps a better move would have been to play g4. And the point is that I'm going to take the pawn on h3 next, and then I'll play rook g3 and start pushing these pawns. And I don't think black has enough compensation to claim equality, at least. I think white would have had a very nice position, but rook h5 is also a great move by Wesley. Queen c8, and now pawn on b6 is falling. Could Magnus have moved the bishop? Yes, it could. But if it does that, knight b5 now is possible. There is no knight f3, and if I take the knight, I will then take back with the bishop. So there is a difference having the rook on h5 instead of h4, and this is indeed one of them. But there is no fork after knight f3. So Magnus, he tried queen c8, and queen takes b6, and now it's starting to look quite good for Wesley. So, but is it going to be enough for the American to win this game? Who knows? Magnus tries knight g4, and as a matter of fact, this is a decisive blunder, which blunders a piece. You can pause the video and see if you can find it. If we go back a little bit, the best move is probably to play bishop g4 and then go for something like this, which is not so clear, a little bit complicated, but I think Wesley is doing well. At least Magnus does have some compensation here with queen f1 in the air, maybe even queen c4. But white needs to play very precise here. The best move here is to play queen b5 to avoid all of those checks, but I wouldn't be so sure that white's going to win this yet, at least, because this is a slightly tricky position where this could happen very quickly. Queen g2, queen takes h2, and all of a sudden the pawn on h3 is queening. So this is certainly a complicated position. But Magnus, he plays knight g4, which is unfortunately for him a blunder, and the right move is to play bishop a6, rook e1 for Magnus, king a2, queen e8, but I can simply take the bishop, and there are no tricks here. And indeed, after knight a3, bishop b5, the position is completely lost, and the game ended after queen e7. So great comeback by Wesley So here, who played a great game, I'd say. Although it was a very complicated game, and unfortunately for Magnus, he is the one that makes the last mistake. And in the brutal game of chess, the one that makes the last mistake usually, or pretty much always, loses the game, and this is no exception. So it stands 2-2 now. It remains to be seen what's happening tomorrow. Stay tuned for more excitement coming your way on Chess24. And indeed, I'll see you soon.